Hello and welcome to Horseplayers Happy Hour. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatal. Happy to be back with you. Not at Walton Whitman Brewing Company and Cafe this week. We're giving them a week's rest from me. Instead, I'm coming to you from the place that we affectionately call the Degenerate Flophouse, adjacent to the Little House on the east side here in Saratoga. And it's Horseplayers Happy Hour. You guys know how this works by now. There's a contest going on over at horseplayers.com. All of the money, the VIG, as it were, from this contest goes to the Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance and the Thoroughbred Retirement Foundation. You can play for a seat into tomorrow's Breeders' Cup qualifier, Breeders' Cup feeder. Feed into it for short money in this event. You've still got time. First scheduled race, I think, is going to go off at about 5:05 Eastern. It's about 4:48 now. So you can even quick cap your way through this 7-race sequence at Belmont, Santa Anita, and Keeneland. It includes 2 win and you're in challenge races for the Breeders' Cup. We will be able to stream those live. We'll be talking about them all. And I've got 3 great guests. We're starting off with the man. You're seeing him on the screen now, one of the most respected figure makers there is. He is intimately involved as the head figure maker over at TimeformUS, part of our new partner, Daily Racing Forums Empire. He also has his own podcast, the TimeformUS Pacecast, and it is a great pleasure to have him back on our airwaves. Craig Milkowski, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for the nice introduction. It's not too hard to be one of the most respected figure makers because I think there's about 5 of us. So.
Maybe a little bit of light praise there from me, but it is fantastic to have you on. I love your approach to the game. You're a fantastic follow over on Twitter at TimeformUSFigs. Let's start with the TimeformUS Pacecast. How often does it come out? How can folks find it? And who else is involved besides yourself?
We do 2 shows a week. It's me and David Aragona, who's our TimeformUS analyst, and he also does the morning line for the NYRA races. I think he actually does a great job. I don't just say that because he's a coworker of mine, but you can tell because he doesn't get as much grief as many others have gotten. But we do a show on Tuesday where we recap the biggest races from the prior week, and then on Fridays we do a TimeformUS forecast where we talk about the upcoming races on the weekend and handicap. We usually try to do like a pick 5 or pick 4 sequence if we can. Not always, but for example, like we did the late pick 5 for the Preakness card, ending with the Preakness itself.
Very cool. Well, it's definitely something that folks can check out on iTunes through. You've got your own feed. You've got the Daily Racing Forum media feed too. I think that I once resided on, but it's great to have you back on the airwaves and very excited to have you talking about these races tonight. Let's start off looking ahead to. It's a hard weekend to pick one race to be the marquee event with these 6 grade ones and all of this Breeders' Cup win and you're in prep action going on. But I'd love to start by chatting with you, Craig, about this year's Preakness, which I think many, including myself, have kind of posited as a match race between Authentic, the Derby winner, and Art Collector. Do you think this year's Preakness is as simple as those 2 and then it's everybody else? Or do you think we could see a surprise on Saturday?
No, I'm kind of in the same boat as you are. I think they're the 2 to beat. Authentic's Derby was really good, in my opinion. I've seen a few people knocking it, saying he had an easy trip, but he was clear most of the way, but he got challenged by the horse who was leading the division. He was able to put him away, was drawing away at the end. So I don't think there was anything phony about his win, and Art Collector's done nothing but demolish every field he's faced this year. So for me as a bettor, it's going to come down to, will Art Collector offer enough value? I'm not going to bet Authentic. I'm assuming he's going to be the favorite, probably 6-5 or less even. So I'm not interested in that. If Authentic is 2-1 or more, maybe I'd take a shot with him. And I think a lot of that depends on how heavily Swiss Skydiver gets bet. She's actually the one I'm against in here. I didn't really like her last race. I know she finished second in that Oaks, but she just didn't look like the same filly to me. She's had a long, hard campaign, and she's one I think might be regressing. So that's the way I look at these races. I like to have an opinion on one horse, and for me, the main one is Swiss Skydiver, and then see if that opinion offers value when the odds open.
I think that's a great point. Many people think an opinion just means, oh, I like horse X in a certain race. That's not how it works. An opinion can also mean, I think there's going to be a de facto takeout reducer in a horse I don't like. In this case, I'm with you that Swiss Skydiver feels like one who could catch a lot of money, who doesn't necessarily have to win. But here's the bad news, Craig. I think I've done 4 different analyses of the Preakness in different media so far. And in 4 instances, the analyst, such as yourself, has said Swiss Skydiver is the one I'm betting against. Do we get to a point here where Swiss Skydiver becomes 8 or 10 to 1 and not so easy to dismiss? Or do you think even at 8 or 10 to 1, she's very easy to get involved with this race to play against?
No, I mean, if she drifts up that high, I still wouldn't be interested in betting her personally, but it's obviously going to drive the odds down on the others. And as you mentioned, it's a huge day of racing Saturday, and I'm perfectly content to watch the Preakness as a fan and just see what happens and be excited to make the pace and speed figures for the race if that's what happens. You know, it's not 1985 anymore when I used to go to Pimlico in my hometown of Baltimore. And, you know, you had 9 races and 1 daily double. So you pretty much bet every race. So we don't have to do that now, even for the marquee ones.
That's a great point. What price would get you wanting to reach in your pocket to bet Art Collector in this year's Preakness?
I think 2 to 1 would be more than fair for him. Anything less than that, I'd be a little leery and probably just pass the race. We do have a good tool at DRF now because, as we all know, odds change often drastically. Probably not so much for a big pool like the Preakness, but even as a guy who uses TimeformUS, I keep Formulator open and I look at those projected odds that we have to kind of get a feel. Because for one, I'm too lazy to sit there and calculate the prices from the will pays and all that stuff. It's already done for me, so I use that tool.
That's very cool. Let's talk about those projected odds for a minute because I haven't spent enough time on them. I'm still a bit of a Luddite using the old school Flash version of Formulator. You're talking about the new and improved version of Formulator that's now the one that everybody's being pushed to, with Flash going to be sunsetted in a matter of months at this point. So it's really as simple as you buy DRF Formulator PPs for a given card, and those projected odds that are based on what's going on in the other pools, the will pays going into the race, as well as tote action, I imagine, currently, and you can get a pretty good idea of what the price is going to be. Am I describing it correctly, and how accurate of a tool is it?
Yeah, that's a pretty good description. It looks at some of the will pays. I forget exactly which ones it uses. I'm sure it uses the double, maybe the pick 3 if it's available, and it uses live betting for the race in question. I believe it shuts down with a couple minutes to post. What I would say is it's not deadly accurate. If it tells you a horse is going to be 2 to 1, it may go off 8 to 5. It may go off 5 to 2. But what it is really accurate on is telling you which direction the horse is going to move. If you're looking at a horse that's 8 to 1 and we have projected odds of 3 to 1, even if it's 2 minutes to post, I can guarantee you're not getting anywhere near 8 to 1 when they go off.
I want to bring you back to the Preakness for a second and just to ask if there's any other horse at a price that looks particularly good on your TimeformUS data that you might think about including either as a small alternative in horizontals or one to use underneath in your vertical bets in this year's Preakness.
Yeah, I think Mr. Big News could be that horse. I don't think there was anything fluky about his Derby. It was a big jump up, but we hadn't seen him in a few months, and that often happens with 3-year-olds. And make no mistake, things could get hot up front. I mean, Authentic has speed. We've seen Art Collector use plenty of speed, Swiss Skydiver, and even 1,000 Words. If he doesn't act up in the paddock again, he won his last race wire to wire. So if they get a bit ambitious up front, I would have no problem going to Mr. Big News.
Before we leave the topic of the Preakness, we may return to this topic later, but I did want you to know, and you can see this if you're following the Breeders' Cup on Twitter, which is very easy to do, at Breeders' Cup. You can spin to win for a $5,000 Preakness bet, action at your fingertips, enter to win the $5,000 spin to win contest, and it's free, and you have a chance also to win a Breeders' Cup shop gift card. So check out the Breeders' Cup Twitter to get all the details about that one. So much great racing this weekend, Craig. We're going to talk about these races that are coming up in a moment here. But of all the races that are going on around the country, is there one particular spot you're particularly excited about as a fan or a bettor?
For me, it's Pimlico. Now, I'll be honest, for Saturday, that's the only one I've looked to in depth at already. But, being my hometown, I love Pimlico. I spent many a day there, probably too many days there. That's why I didn't finish college. Wound up in the Air Force partly because of Pimlico. But, I can say that now that my parents are no longer with us. They won't call and lecture me later. But yeah, it was that's the one I'm looking forward to. Keeneland as well. I mean, it looks like a strong card. Some of the races I looked at didn't look that great for betting, but some of them did. I'm particularly interested in the mile turf race. I want to say the Shadwell, but I'm feeling like that's wrong. Maybe
that's it.
The Shadwell. I always get the spring one and the fall one mixed up. Yeah, the Shadwell looked interesting. So, I mean, I'll be watching them all. I have RTN at home, and I'll have a tablet going. I'll have the Fox show on with Belmont on another one, and we'll just be checking them all out. The one track that looked a little late was our busy track last week, Santa Anita, so I haven't really peered at that one, but definitely Pimlico, Belmont, and Keeneland.
There's going to be so much going on. I'm pumped. The Woodbine card is great, too. There's some exciting stuff there with Cheryl Spite coming back after his disappointing run in the Woodbine Mile, but interested to see how he does back in. And it's just great action from four corners at least, and I'm super duper looking forward to it. Going to be actually hosting a little benefit in Saratoga to watch the Preakness and some of these other races. If folks are around and want to join us, you can go and make a direct donation to one of our benefactors today, the Thoroughbred Retirement Foundation. That's over at trfinc.org/players. Of course, you can also give directly to the Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance, who do the important work of accrediting all these various aftercare organizations, helping to allocate money to the places and horses that need it most. That you can find them, tbaftercare.com, a couple of other options. Let's go back, Craig, and talk about your days, the education you got that had nothing to do with the university that ended you up in the Air Force. I'm interested in this because there's this long history of horse players, and I think we can include. Pretty sure Andy Beyer is in this camp himself. People who were so lured by horse racing that they neglected to finish or were at the very least highly distracted from their academic careers. What are some of the life lessons you think you got being a horse player at such an early age? I have to say, some of the smartest, sharpest, wisest people I know do not have advanced degrees, and they got their education more or less at the racetrack. So I want to drill down on this topic for a minute.
Yeah, well, it all started back in high school. I went to high school with Larry Colmes. We were good friends there, and he kept browbeating me to go to the track. And I was like, I'm not going to the track. I had no interest. And he finally talked me into it, and I was hooked. And we actually went to the same college, Loyola College in Baltimore. Larry lasted a semester longer than I did, believe it or not, but not much longer. But we both found our way out, and it's hard to say what I learned. One thing I definitely learned was how to manage some money. Luckily, I didn't have much back then because I wouldn't have had it because I didn't know squat. You think you do when you first start out, but you don't. And just, some of those lessons, I would say money management, just also how to keep an even keel. You can't get too high or low in horse racing. It's easy to do when you cash a ticket or when you have a bad loss. But once you do it for a while, you kind of realize that, the good times and the bad times are going to come, and you just kind of got to roll with it and hope you get a few more good times than bad.
I think that sounds right. That idea of the equanimity one needs. Horse racing will teach you that really quick. You see people at the track who get really high or really low, but you don't tend to see them year after year after year in the way you can see people who can manage to keep their act together a little bit more when it comes to that stuff. So when did you start making figures?
I actually started that when I was stationed at McGuire Air Force Base. I left Baltimore, went to basic training and all that, and got stationed in New Jersey, which I guess I would say, fortunately for me, was kind of the empire of simulcasting at the time back in the 80s. I mean, some places you would go and they would have one or two tracks to bet, but I would go to Garden State Park, which was about 30 minutes away, and they literally had every track on the menu. And I started, looking at it and saying, man, I wonder if I can take advantage of this. But, though I figured out pretty quickly that the buyers were coming around. They were available in Briss and eventually in the Racing Times. But it wasn't too hard to figure out that everybody was betting them as well. So there wasn't a whole lot of value. Still a good tool to use. I mean, for me, I couldn't bet without figures, I don't think. I don't think you can win betting top figures, but you need them to assess the horses, at least partially. So, it was kind of just one of those things where I said, I'm going to figure out how to do this myself. And I was a big pace guy. I like to look at races and see how they were going to develop. It was one of the things I learned were horses that looked like maybe they didn't match up would get easy leads or win, or horses would get pace meltdowns. And believe it or not, I went to the library at McGuire Air Force Base, and they just had a plethora of horse race handicapping books.
Amazing. We're coming back to this subject, but right now we've got 3 minutes till this first race at Keeneland. Let's not forget to come back to that. I'm saying this to myself as much as anything else. I want to hear about what books you read and all that stuff. But we have another special guest. He was meant to be here for a bit longer of a hit. Maybe he'll be back with us later. But joining us from his car, where he's stuck in traffic, there he is, folks, at UT. Big hair himself. You can see the Rachel Alexandra tattoo. I think he's wearing jockey goggles. I don't know what's going on in his face. The people's champion, Jonathan Kitchen. What's up, JK?
Yeah, I had a friend got me these, and so they're pretty wild, huh? But
are they goggles?
No, they're just like silly sunglasses.
I thought he was going skiing.
They're fun. I like wearing them.
Do you ski, JK? Those could come in very handy. Not sure you heard that. We have a win and you're in race for the Breeders' Cup Sprint coming up in just a couple of minutes. It's the Grade 2 Phoenix. We've got some big names in here, horses we've had the pleasure of paying attention to the last several years, the likes of Whitmore and Diamond Oops and No Parole and Echo Town, Lexitonian back for more in this spot. JK, I don't know. Have you had a chance to look at the Keeneland card for today? Do you have an opinion in this year's Phoenix, or should we start things off with Craig?
No, I mean, I glanced. I think that there's the 3-year-olds are interesting to me. No Parole and Echo Town. I think Echo Town last time was a little bit too far, and No Parole, I feel like on his best day is definitely good enough to win a race like this. Whitmore is a horse that has my heart. He doesn't always have my mind. I think he's a really cool horse, but I feel like he always leaves himself a lot to try to do. So I'm not sure what price No Parole is right now, but for me, No Parole and Echo Town, I think is the kind of the late blooming 3-year-olds are the ones that I'd be interested in here.
No Parole, number 5, is 3-1. Echo Town, the 6, is 7-1. I actually thought like this might set up okay for your old friend Whitmore, who's the 3, currently sitting at 4-1. That's not a bad price to me for Whitmore. I just feel like there might be enough pace to set up the late run, and I felt like he just didn't handle the slop last time. And this was a point, and Craig, this segues beautifully into you. Oh gosh, they're loading. Craig, who do you like in the Phoenix?
Not a lot of variety for me. I like No Parole in this spot. I love to cut back to 6, and I think he's just going to be able to outrun him and get a nice, easy lead.
All right, so we have 3 different opinions here. We'll see how it plays out. The point I was going to make about Whitmore, and this is something I love about the Timeform USPPs, not all off-going is created equally. And when you look at how sloppy the track was last time, which Whitmore didn't appear to handle, it didn't really look like the mildly off surfaces that he'd handled in the past. All right, so they're off in the Phoenix. Craig, can we get the call? We might as well listen to the call if we can get it. But if we can't, don't worry about it. We can talk it through as usual. No Parole making the lead here. We have also in forward position Empire of Gold, the 7, with Diamond Oops close and right up on the pace today as well. I missed the opportunity to just make Matt Bernier call these races, or better yet, Michelle Yu, when she's been on with us. She does a fantastic job. But right now, No Parole getting scrubbed on a little bit as this long shot Empire of Gold comes up to his throat latch and pokes a neck in front. And the others better get going. We could have a bit of a boil over, as they say in the UK, with this number 7 horse, Empire of Gold, making the lead and appearing to find. We do have some runners coming from the back now, with the 4 in particular making some seriously good headway. That's Diamond Oops. Looks like he's going to run right by and get the money, with the long shot 7 holding on for second. And it looks like the horse on the inside, whose saddle towel I couldn't see, got third. Whitmore flattened out a bit late there, but looked like we might have something completely insane happen there for a moment. Craig, did you see anything on paper with Empire of Gold that would have given you any sort of inkling you might run a race that huge?
No, not particularly. He had run a nice race at Lone Star 3 back, but it would be a stretch. There was nothing in those books at McGuire Air Force Base that would have pointed me to that horse.
JK, what about Diamond Dupes? Is this horse one that you had on your radar for this race? And is this a horse who might make good use of this win and you're in opportunity at the Breeders' Cup Sprint? Comes off that nice turf sprint win back at Churchill on Derby Day. Certainly has some fast back races, but I have to say, we really look to run a new level of form in this race for me.
Yeah, I mean, he's the type of horse that, and I bet you, Craig, I don't have time for him in front of me right now. I would imagine Diamond Oops has a lot of red in his past performances in terms of fast pace figures. So horses like that are always dangerous, whether they earn those figures on turf or dirt. So he's an interesting one. I mean, look, I didn't dive into the race too heavy. I knew that Echo Town and No Parole were in there, and those were the ones that I want to kind of go at a shorter distance. But Diamond Oops isn't one that I'm necessarily looking to cut in line to bet on in the Breeders' Cup.
We'll throw that question to you, Craig. What is your perspective on Diamond Oops, this horse who certainly has versatility?
Yeah, he does. I mean, I think he narrowly missed in a mile turf race at the, it might have been at Keeneland, if I remember right. And he's certainly run some big figures. I'll reserve judgment until I see the speed figure. But to be honest, the horses haven't run particularly fast in sprints this year. It's a complete flip from last year, where the sprinters were by far the stars of the division from a figure standpoint. So Diamond Oops, if he ran a 125 or something like that today, I think he'd be a really strong contender in a race like the sprint. I'd certainly rather see him in that than in the dirt mile like he was last year.
Question for you, Craig. When you mention that 125 figure, JK and I do this all the time on the show. You can now tell us that we're full of baloney or onto something. When we try to compare apples to apples, your TimeformUS figures with Andy Byers' figures, we will typically deduct 20 points from your figure to equate what it would be roughly on the Byers scale. Is that a lot of hooey, or might there be some signal there?
No, I would have told you guys by now if it wasn't. I listened to your podcast. No, 20 is a good number. Our figures are on the Timeform scale. There was a time when it was more in the 13 range, but it's kind of drifted for, I don't even want to get into that. That's a whole long discussion, but 20 is definitely a pretty accurate number. It's not going to be right for every race. Of course, we use pace figures, so sometimes our figure is higher or lower than the final time figure, but the 20 is a really good approximation. And I would say 90 to 95% of the time, you're going to be within a few points.
Let me ask you this about the Timeform figures. When there are horses, when you're talking about the Timeform figures from overseas and trying to translate them for like Breeders' Cup runners or Arlington Million horses in other years, I do feel like that 13 number is probably more accurate. And even today, this is just me, my opinion. And again, please tell me if I'm crazy. I feel like sometimes and I'm the biggest TimeformUS fan there is. I'm just quibbling here. But I feel like the European runners are often stronger than the numbers that appear in TimeformUS. And maybe even now there's a little bit of a difference between how you translate Timeform UK figure to the US and a TimeformUS figure to the buyer scale.
Yeah, it's a little different when we're talking about the shippers now, because I don't look at it in Formulator. I just look at TimeformUS, and we're already doing the conversion for you. We take out the weight for age part of the figures and things like that. So I just straight up whatever shows, and I haven't seen them be too hard. I notice with younger horses, they do tend to come back pretty low, especially if they're coming from cheaper tracks and non-listed races and things like that. But I just kind of have learned to adapt to that. I think Frankel could have run in a maiden race there and won by 30 lengths, and they would have maybe gave him 100. Right. They just don't rate those horses high. They do things a little bit differently than we do because they're not using the clock. They're looking at the whole field. Maybe they use the clock as a little part of it, but
a little bit. Yeah, that's right. It's more it's more form. It's more form based, and just again, these are just my observations as we have a nice price winner in our second contest race number 4 at Santa Anita. I had liked the 1 Allie's Pal who got ran down there, so just as well that I didn't say that on these airwaves. The 9 gets the job done. I feel bad I didn't give you a chance to comment on that race if you'd had an opinion, Craig. But we'll see what happens for our leaderboard that'll pop up here. In a minute. But thinking about the USA figures on turf as opposed to on dirt, this definitely, I'm making this observation about the buyers. You can tell me if it's true for you as well. I feel like the turf figures just necessarily involve so much more projection and a little bit more guesswork based on form than the dirt figures do. Is that true for the buyer figures, do you think? And is it also true for your figures?
It would definitely be true for the buyer figures, particularly because they don't include pace. So a lot of times they have to break races out. We're not quite as much in that boat at TimeformUS because, we might have a race with a final time figure of 100, but the winner gets a 112 because he closed into a slow pace. So we don't have to break as many races out because of that factor. We kind of have that second dimension instead of only having one. But still, turf races can be tough. As we see with a lot of NYRA races, sometimes the pace is so slow, there's just no adjustment in the world that's going to make a reasonable figure if you try to rate it with the other races. The one thing that helps nowadays is it's not like the old days where there were 1, maybe 2 turf races on a card. These days, sometimes it's almost a struggle to make dirt figures because at some of the bigger tracks, there might be 7 turf races and 4 dirt races, and the 4 dirt races were 2 maiden claimers, a 2-year-old, and 1 stakes race. So I find myself having a harder time on dirt many times than turf.
That's interesting.
Just because of how much it's increasing and how many races there are.
Right. No, that's a great point. Let's loop back before I forget to that question you talked about before when you were in the Air Force library looking for old handicapping books. Whose work were you reading back then?
Of course, Andy Beyer. I read all his books, and but the one that really got me going down the pace avenue was William Quirin. I think it was called Handicapping State of the Art, and it just kind of showed how pace could affect final time, and it was pretty crude for the time, and he used a lot of shall we say, very limited samples, but it got me thinking in that direction. Obviously, he was working with limited tools, 40, 50 years ago, whatever it was. But, these days you can test everything, anything I want to put into a figure. If it sounds good, it doesn't necessarily play out that way, but we can process data. We can query a database and figure all these things out. Now, I'll be the first to admit there's no figures are going to make you magically have a positive 10% ROI. But you can definitely improve them. And that's what we're always working to do.
Isn't there value, though, in just being able to reduce, get your loss below, and we're going down a rabbit hole here, but below the level of the takeout? In other words, when you can compare numbers to each other, you can start to see where the signal is. And, maybe you're handicapping, maybe it's hard to beat the full blended takeout. But if you can find these tools that can get you into a single digit type of negative ROI, then you can use your smarts as a handicapper to make up the difference. That's how I look at it anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Figures are just one part, but I think they're an important part. But even as a guy who makes speed figures for most of the horses you see running, I know better than to just blindly bet top figures. There are times I will. But, like everything else in this game, it all comes down to value. It comes down to using your eyes. Not all speed figures are created equal. They might both say 100 and you watch the race and get two totally different feels for both of those. Both DRF and TimeformUS, you can easily bring up the PPs for most of the tracks and see the replay. I use RTN a lot. So, I don't just want to know what the number is. I want to know how they did it, how the race set up, things like that. So, I'm more of a guy who's looking at form, and I use figures as part of that to see horses who I think are improving, horses who I think are tailing off. It's just one part of many when you handicap these races.
That's so interesting to me because I was going to ask you about numbers versus visual appearance and that concept that's controversial, especially among figure makers, about being visually impressive. I think of a runner like Princess Noor last weekend, who I feel like in general, people who just watch races and aren't that worried about figures are super excited about for the Breeders' Cup juvenile fillies. And then the more numerically oriented folks can't wait to bet against her because the figure came back low. How do you, in your own personal betting, weigh up that concept of visually impressive versus what the raw data tells you?
Well, I'll be honest. I've learned a lot over the years because I used to be one of those guys who couldn't wait to bet against them. And what happens is you tear up a lot of tickets when you do that, because a lot of times those horses can run faster. Not always, but particularly when you're talking about young developing horses like that who really had no reason to run fast on Sunday. I mean, she was going to win that race regardless. So I'd be a little leery. Now, I'm not going to bet on her in the Breeders' Cup. There's zero chance of that happening. But I won't be as aggressive taking a stand against her either when it comes time. I would definitely want to see some value from some of the others and have a reason to think that she wouldn't be able to improve enough to beat him.
Folks, that's what the voice of experience sounds like.
From a guy who tried to beat Zenyatta for about 15 times in a row because her figures stunk.
Yeah, but her late pace figures, that shocks me that you say that, because her late pace figures were sick. Yeah. Were you not as inclined to look at an isolated late pace figure at that point in your horse playing days? This is a really interesting conversation to me. We've got to go here.
No, I probably exaggerated a little bit. Most of the time I just watched those races. She looked like she had the field over a barrel, but a few times I didn't. And synthetic was still pretty new when she was first starting. So, I didn't really have that handle on it, even when it came to making figures. If you look up her figures now that we use the methods we do, she has humongous figures because in those routes on synthetics,
exactly,
she had that late kick and they would, she would look like a standout. But at the time, I didn't do it that way. So I was, it wasn't that I didn't respect her. I thought she got ripped off as a 4-year-old. I thought she should have been, I think it was that year that she should have been horse of the year, more so even than her 6-year-old year. But so I was kind of a fan, went to see her at Oakland, but the betting side of me kept seeing 1-5 and going, I got to beat this. I got to. But, you learn over time, you pick your spots when you're trying to beat a 1-5 because they're going to win the vast majority of time. And when they don't, you still got to get the winner.
They're about to pop for race 9 at Belmont. I don't know if I should. This is a host fail. I didn't ask you how much you'd prep for the races that were going to be on while you were on. I liked looking for trouble in here as the possible best of speed. They've already popped from the gate. Did you have a thought here just for academic purposes, Craig?
I was just looking at the 5 and the 12 and the pace projector. Both of them are shown up front on a slow pace. So I don't know what their odds are, but if either one of those was a reasonable price, I was going to take a shot with them. It's unlikely on the 5. I imagine he's probably the favorite.
Are you talking about the Keeneland race coming up?
No, the Belmont, the 8th, right? Was it the 8th race?
We're on to the 9th at this point.
On to the 9th. Okay.
So we can look and see how your 5 and 12 did. This race, I'll just give a shout out because he was on the network this week, and somebody who I'm sure you also respect immensely, because how could you not? But Stephen Christ, who owns part of Thin White Duke, they would have gone among the favorites here, ended up scratching out of this spot to run at the Finger Lakes for more money against the field of all maidens when this was a field of all winners. one of the more no-brainer decisions, but people still sometimes don't play the game at that level. So, we're rooting for Thin White Duke this weekend, and not just because we're big Steve Christ and David Bowie fans around here. They're turning for home, and Looking for Trouble is in with a shot, but looks to me like is going to have his hands full holding off, I think that's Hold the Salsa, making what looks like the winning move on the outside. And yeah, this one looks like it's going to come 6-7-3 at Belmont. We'll get a leaderboard update in here at some point. I've kept you longer than I said, Craig, but I hope you don't mind, because we're not done, because I went on a tangent and I never got the answer to the question about the books you were reading in the library.
Yeah, I had said The Buyer, the Kieran book. I read some of the James Quinn books. Tom Ainsley, I remember, was one. But even by then, a lot of that was outdated. That was a pretty old library. But I remember being shocked. There were so many books in there. And some of them I checked out multiple times, or I would just hang out there and read them. And just kind of work from there. One thing I learned, it's funny, we just saw that was a 2-year-old race there. As a figure guy, one place I don't put a lot of stock in speed figures is 2-year-old races. It's not that the speed figures aren't accurate. I think they are accurate, but the horses are just changing so rapidly. They're running further and further as the year goes on. Some come out ready to roll, others takes 3 or 4 tries. So that's one of those where I mentioned as more of a form guy. I'm looking for the horse that's going to run fast today that hasn't in the past.
It's great.
I don't know
stuff.
if I would have came up with that winner or not. I don't remember, but
what I want to ask about Tom Brohammer specifically, because when I think of the type of work you do, and I think about groundbreaking pace analysis, Kieran should absolutely be in the conversation, no doubt about it. But for me, it was Brohammer who really opened my eyes to the world of pace. And I was curious when, if ever, he came into your machinations as a figure maker.
Yeah, I read all his stuff too. I forgot him. Didn't mean to leave him out. His was a little more technical and a little with all the percentages. I mean, I could tell you all the formulas from all that. I can't even remember the guy's name now. I'm drawing a blank. Who he was a disciple of.
Sarton.
Yeah, Sarton. Yeah. I could probably tell you all those formulas and everything, but for me, I think that went a little bit deep, and I didn't like how they didn't really use track variant a whole bunch in there. And when I actually did try to put that stuff into play, and it didn't work for me. Maybe it works for some other people, but I was too hardwired by then to really think a track variant was important. And I certainly wasn't going to use the DRF variant and things like that. And,
well, that's right. That's what they would do as a quick and dirty. It's just amazing to me that they did that stuff in a day before computers. I mean, it must have taken 4 hours. No, I'm not exaggerating. It must have taken 4 hours to handicap a card. But I guess when you're the only one with the information, that type of work is worth it. It's just, it's mind-boggling to me to think back to that. One thing I'll say, and this is another, maybe this is even a request, I would love to see in your figures, and I think we talked about this years ago, back in my DRF days, some metric within the TimeformUS PPs that was a reflection of what Brohammer or Sarton would have called late pace. I know you can create that figure with a formula using the numbers that you're producing on a day-to-day basis, but I'd love to see that right in the PPs. There's sort of a proxy for it on the TimeformUS home screen, but I'd love to see it for each and every race. Is that something that you think would be valuable? And do you think there's any chance it will ever make its appearance?
It's going to happen because I bring it up all the time. I don't know where it is on the list, but I think as far as what you're talking about, it's kind of how we break fractions down. You can either have cumulative or incremental, and you're looking for incremental pace figures, right? Where you see what they ran for the first quarter, second quarter, and then the finish. I assume that's what you're talking about.
Yes, exactly. That from a single figure that in a positive way represents from the pace call to the final. The same way that a lot of people will just look at, I mean, I know successful horse players who have done really well just looking at raw come home times without them being turned into a figure and adjusted with a variant. I feel like you could very easily automate something that would do the same, that would be just incredibly valuable in turf races obviously, but I think also in dirt races just to help tell that story. I'm sure you, with your skill set, do that very much intuitively when you're looking at your array of numbers. But I feel like as a commercial product, that idea of, hey, I can like almost hear the chatter now about how did that horse win at, 12-1. Oh, did you see the LP two back?
Right. Yeah, I'm going to send a link to this if you guys put out an after the show. I don't know if you do that or not, but tell my boss I've been beating on him for 2 years. If it's something I won, because it's really, we already have those buttons for fractions, so it shouldn't be that tough of a deal to do. I don't want to put that on our tech guys. Maybe it's tougher than I know. I'm just a hack programmer who does what he has to do. If I don't know how to do something, I Google it and figure it out, but not at the level those guys at DRF are. So
you blame me. You blame me.
His ammo.
You tell Phil Trowler and Mark Attenberg that this guy Fornatel's wearing me out about getting LPs in the TimeformUS pace figures. I couldn't be a bigger fan of the product, and I only think that would make it that much better. Let's do what should we do? Let's talk about the Alcibiades. Grade 1 win and you're in action at Keeneland. This race year after year produces runners that go on to compete in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. We've got a ton of time until the race takes place. We're still 13 minutes to race number 9 at Keeneland. But while I have you here, Craig, we absolutely have to talk about this one. Where did your eye go in handicapping this race?
My eye first went to Crazy Beautiful, the 4-horse. I like that she was able to actually close. Now, she was getting a little tired late in that race at Churchill, but she's the one horse that I think in here that really looks like she wants 2 turns. Doesn't look like there's much doubt about that to me. She's been sprinting mostly. She did the 1-turn mile at Churchill last time, but for me, she's the one that I was drawn to most. I'm usually, as a guy betting 2-year-old races, I'm against horses like the 7 Simply Ravishing that do their best running in sprints. Even when they have the best figures, it's just such a different game. It doesn't mean they can't win. I'm sure, those kind of horses do win a decent amount of these, but there's just never any value when you bet those kinds. So I'm looking for more horses who have either done it before or who look like they're going to, and not just a guess.
Crazy Beautiful makes a ton of sense. That was a tough trip last time. I thought that was against the speed favoring flow with trouble, blocked at a critical stage, showed a lot of courage. But when you talk about horses that want 2 turns, to me on breeding, my eye goes right to Travel Column, being bifrosted out of a Victory Gallop mare. And I also like the fact that this one attacked pace that on your figures was coded red. I can't get past the idea that the Travel Column could be extremely dangerous in this spot. Do you see that one at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think she's the horse to beat. She has the best speed figure last time. I'm a little leery of horses like her, despite the breeding being right there on those red fractions, because, sometimes they don't always run the breeding. And that's not really the kind of line I want to see for horses stretching out. I like to see a more even kind of line. But she certainly had plenty of ability, and it wouldn't shock me at all if she were to just whoop this field, pretty easily based on that number she ran. I'm not sure what kind of value she's going to offer, but the one trick for me, as I say, is I'd rather not see those red fractions when I see a horse stretching out.
That's very interesting, and it's not something that I've ever paid attention to, and we're going to have to talk about it more. But you mentioned the value right now. Travel Column 3-1, Crazy Beautiful hanging in tough at 5-2. I've never thought about the world that way. So in the TimeformUS figures, well, let's first explain. We've gone deep down the rabbit hole. Now let's back it out for people who are listening who might want to learn something about TimeformUS and the work you do. First of all, define the difference between the figures that you have coded blue and the figures that you have coded black and the figures that you have coded red.
Okay, it's pretty simple. The figures we have coded red are, what we do is we compare them to the final time figure. So, for example, if a horse runs 100 final time figure, an even race would be where they ran 100 all the way across. And then what we do to determine if a race is in red is we look at it, and if it's in the top 15% gap from that final time to the pace call, we're going to mark it in red and say it's fast. So say the opening quarter was a 130, that 30-point difference is probably going to be in that top 15%. So we're going to code it in red. On the other hand, if it's blue, it means it's one of the slower races. If it was like a 70 pace figure compared to 100 final time figure, that's going to be in that bottom 15%. And it's going to tell you that the pace was slower than normal. Now, you're not going to see that for individual horses. Any coding you see is for the leader in the race, because we're trying to give you an idea of what the flow of the race was from a pace figure, from a time perspective. There's other ways to look at pace. You can look at, was a horse all alone? Were they challenged? There is more to pace than just the raw times, but that's where the blue and the red fractions come in. And if it's in black, it just falls in that middle 70%.
What a great description. And that's very interesting. So when you see a horse running in a sprint and you see that red coding, no matter what the breeding is, your inclination is that this horse is going to be more of a sprinter. And perhaps conversely, with a horse like Crazy Beautiful, when you see those blue numbers in the pace line, you feel like they're maybe more likely to stretch out. I've never thought about the world that way. I'm trying to get my head around it, but it's pretty interesting. Is that a correct assessment of your opinion?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. You mentioned Tom Brohammer before, and I think that comes from his energy adjustments that he did, where he would look for horses that distributed their energy in a certain way and how they finished races as an indicator of whether they wanted more or less distance or maybe turf instead of dirt. And it's just kind of carried over for me. I don't do it in the same exact way he does, where I'm calculating those numbers, but the blue and red give me a pretty good indication of whether a horse was really finishing fast or not.
Do you agree with the idea JK and I always talk about? You like those horses coming back at a similar distance, coded red on the front end, and on especially longer turf races, those horses when they're trying to close into the blue numbers and then they're coming back in a race where it looks like there's going to be more pace. Is that reductive or is that accurate by your reckoning?
No, I would say that that's pretty accurate. I mean, the better closer, better setup a closer is going to get, more likely they're going to run well. It can be a little tricky on turf. There are some horses who, despite being closers, do better with a slow pace, and you'll see it in the PPs when they get that really fast pace. They don't show up. Maybe they don't have that turn of foot to keep up and still have the finishing kick. So that's one thing I do like to look through horses, the PPs, to see how they've handled certain pace scenarios before. If we have it projected to be red and there's a lot of speed, or maybe somebody entered a rabbit, I want to see some good efforts in there where a horse has run well with a fast pace. But I will definitely give an excuse for closers when those pace figures are blue, because a lot of times you're just trying to catch a horse that had a big head start and it's impossible to do.
I've been remiss to this point in not offering even one leaderboard update. Producer Craig pointed this out to me, and I think we should pop up the leaderboard and see who's up there. And look at that. It's a friend of the show, Ernest Hay Jr. in the top spot right now through 3 races with what looks like 49.60. How many did we get? Oh, we had a very good day today. We've got 9 folks who are going to win a $179 entry into Saturday's qualifier. So we'll read down their names as of right now. Robert Morgan in second, 43.30. Michael, I've seen your name so many times and I still don't know how to pronounce it. I'm going to go with Illies at 38.40. Number 4, Brian Ingram, 29.50. Dave Gray, there's an easy one to pronounce, also in that scrum at 29.50, along with James Politano and Raymond Miller. Not the old Baltimore Orioles pitching coach, Craig. Don't get too excited. I guess it could be. Actually, I'm not sure that Ray Miller, the old Orioles pitching coach, is still with us, unfortunately. And then there's another old friend and a bourbon drinker, which I always like to say, Ken McMahon, currently sitting there with 25. And in 9th, Myron Roberts, also with 25. It's a big scrum in 25 as well. Nancy Spence, Bruce Meyer. We might as well read the rest of them. James Malaro, Lorenzo De Leon, and boom, we'll leave it there. We'll see. Those folks in great position to make their way on to the Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge. Craig, have you ever played in handicapping contests at all? And what is your general opinion of them?
My opinion is I want to, but I don't think I know enough about them yet because I don't have time. So I haven't dipped my feet into it yet. But it is something I really want to explore. But I just don't want to be going in there unprepared and overmatched. So I'm going to do some reading. I know you've got a book out there. I do all the reading that I can on there. It's just, we've talked about already. I love to read anything I can about handicapping and betting and horses. Doesn't even have to be horses. I've read poker books. I've read highlight books. You name it. You never know.
Well, stop the presses. There's a highlight book.
There is. It's more about a guy who developed a system, a computer system to figure out highlight, and he actually beat the game doing it. So I was more fascinated by the computer part than the sport itself. I'm not sure I entirely trust those guys, but this guy found a way to do it, and he wasn't worried about any chicanery or anything like that, and he did well. And he wasn't a gambler, by say. He was more a scientist, if I remember, and a computer programmer. And he just did it as a project. And it was a really fascinating read. I can't remember the name of it, but maybe I'll tweet it out later.
Yeah, please do. Please do. I need to read that. It sounds like the Ed Thorpe of highlight. I didn't know this existed. And I'm wondering, well, you know what? Let's go here. You talk about the computer element. We all know that a big piece of the betting market these days is bet by folks using computers to do both the handicapping and the betting pieces of the puzzle. How, in your view, Craig, have the so-called computer groups changed betting for the likes of you and me?
Well, it's no doubt in my mind it's made it harder. I think these guys are very sharp. Obviously, they're not betting millions of dollars just to give it to guys like us. They're doing it to win money. They're getting healthy rebates. So I think for people like us, it just means you have to be a lot more selective. And you also kind of have to handicap the computer teams. It's pretty easy if you look at race after race, the horses they bet down, to figure out what they're betting, I think. And when you don't like those horses, I think you got to kind of really go after those races and just be picky. They definitely like speed, in my opinion. They like top connections, of course. And, it's easier to bet things like that when you're betting at a 5% takeout as opposed to 18 like we are. So, we're playing two different games, but you got to keep them in mind when you make your bets.
This is great. That's such a great point. Let's talk about TimeformUS. The PPs have a little algorithm that gives predictions on the front screen. The TimeformUS algorithm of the horses that it comes up with for a given race, how typically do you think those match up with horses that computer teams are going to be betting down? Is there a correlation there or no?
There is some. I know we have some pretty big customers out there that are buying our data in bulk. So they're definitely, I'm not all of them for sure, but there are some. So it's getting used. I don't know what goes into that algorithm, to be honest, to give the US power picks. Really? I know it's largely based on speed figures, but I wasn't involved in the power pick part.
Who created that algorithm if not you?
I don't know. I think, as far as I know, I think it might have been Chris Rossi. Who you may know from Twitter. I think it was him.
Interesting.
But they were largely based on the best speed figure in the last 5, but not totally. The pace projector plays a part, so maybe that speed figure doesn't mean as much if we have it coded as a race without speed or with too much speed. But otherwise, I look at them. That's kind of where I start my handicapping. It doesn't mean that's who I'm going to bet, of course, but some people use the morning line. Some people go in post position order. I always start with the power picks and go that way.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, JK, a big proponent of handicapping in the order that the pace projector puts horses. Chris Rossi, for those who don't know, the artist sometimes known as O Crunk. He can be grumpy, but he's very sharp. We're about to go into the gate here for the Darley Alcibiades at Keeneland, a race I'm still getting guff years later for one time on a random podcast 4 years ago when I mistakenly called this race. What did I say? I think I said the Alcibiades. My phone has never blown up like it did that day. It's the Alcibiades. It's a key prep for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. And we're going to see what happens here. I'm super boring. I'm trying to get through with the 2 and the 4. Craig gave a preference to the 4. Any other thoughts on this race before they pop, Craig?
No, not particularly. Just looking to see. It should be a good one. Chris Rossi is a great guy, by the way. I loved working with him. I was sorry that he left, but really sharp guy, and he knows way more about the database stuff than I do.
I'd love to meet him in real life. I mean, just to be completely honest, a person who I haven't had the most pleasant dealings with in the social media world, but I've also had people I haven't had the most pleasant dealings with in the social media world where I meet them in real life and they become good friends. And it looks like we have the call for the Alcibiades. Let's give it to Kurt Becker.
The first turn, Simply Ravishing moves up from the far side starting spot, starts to move by the inside traffic, has the early advantage. Simply Ravishing now starts to angle down toward the rail midway on the first turn, leading Crazy Beautiful by just a length. Thoughtfully is tucked away neatly into third behind the leader as they head off the first turn. Extrema is fourth and stays toward the outside because Travel Column has the spot toward the rail in fifth. The gap of 5 more lengths to Gramercy, who is next to last. Olivia of the Desert last of the 7, 24.43 seconds for the opening quarter. Simply Ravishing the leader. Simply Ravishing on top by just a length. And Crazy Beautiful goes second by a length and a half. Thoughtfully leaves the inside lane open. That allows Travel Column to move up from fourth to challenge for third. Extrema moves to the far outside in fifth, just 3 lengths off the lead into the far turn. Then a gap of 8 more lengths back to Gramercy and Olivia of the Desert, 48.59 seconds, the time for the first half mile. Simply Ravishing is the leader by just 1 length around the far turn. Crazy Beautiful is second by a neck. Travel Column now moves up to challenge for that second spot. Looks for a little more running room as they move by the quarter pole to the top of the short stretch. A gap of 5 more lengths. Thoughtfully is back there in fourth. Extrema is fifth, and Simply Ravishing still the leader. Simply Ravishing a 4-length lead moving into the final furlong. Now it's out to 5. Travel Column is in a tussle for that second spot along with Crazy Beautiful, well behind Simply Ravishing. Luis Saez aboard. It is all Simply Ravishing in the Darley Alcibiades. Opened up and won it by 7.
Very impressive performance there from one who we weren't sharp enough to highlight in Simply Ravishing, who just physically looked extremely impressive as well. Looked like a woman against the girls there in the Alcibiades. Craig, your thoughts on what you just saw there from Simply Ravishing?
Of course, I will have to make the numbers, but that looked like a blue fraction race to me. Got it written all over it. So it's probably, I would say, she wasn't as good as it's going to look visually. It looks like she got away with murder on the front end. I haven't followed today, but 143 and change is pretty quick. Doesn't really match up with a 112 and change 3/4 mile. So, it happens. It's not one I would have picked, but I think she had a cupcake trip right there.
Love it. I love it. I can't wait to see how the figures come back. Craig, thank you so much. So appreciative of your time here today. I kept you longer than I said I was going to. And, we'll do it again soon because it's just so fun getting your perspective on all of this stuff. So what we're going to do now, we'll let Craig go. We'll catch up with him soon. Check him out on the TimeformUS Pacecast. You hear the man, he's as sharp as they come. And David Aragona, his co-host on there, also somebody, I would prefer to hear David and Craig's opinion of any race before I bet it. That's the nicest compliment I can give anybody. So there you go as far as that goes. And then we're going to throw this back to a conversation I had last night with Nick Luck about all the Breeders' Cup win and you're in action happening in France this weekend. Craig, thank you so much for your time today.
I loved it. Anytime, Pete.
And now I'm very happy to welcome in a broadcaster that you're going to recognize from his work on NBC and his work, especially in this part of the world, in the Money Media Network part of the world, the fantastic job he's been doing on his new eponymous daily podcast. Nick Luck, welcome to Horseplayers Happy Hour. How are you?
I'm glad you got my career priorities right anyway.
NBC and then us. Is there something else?
Hang on. In the Money Media Podcast, NBC.
So I got it backwards, you're saying. I should have done it the other way around. Well, we're very happy to have you here. And I know a lot of USA racing fans are already starting to think ahead to some of the English, Irish, and French runners who will be appearing at this year's Breeders' Cup. Is it me, or does it seem like we're going to have a pretty robust foreign contingent from this far out?
Well, it seems that way, but I've learned over time that sometimes you think it's going to be a very thin group and you end up with tons of horses, and sometimes you think it's going to be fantastic and they all fall by the wayside. And given the Breeders' Cup is a little later this year than it normally is, we're 6th, 7th of November at Keeneland, lots can happen between now and then. Don't forget, we've got everything this weekend. There's 16 winning your in races, many of which are in Europe. And then we've got British Champions Day. So there's lots of good horses to run between now and the Breeders' Cup, and then potentially have targets changed or go wrong or call it the day for the season or go over the top or figure they don't want to travel, whatever. So yeah, there's lots of variables, and there's probably horses we haven't even considered that we're going to end up talking about in 4 weeks' time as horses we really love for that event. So much can change, but broadly speaking, yes, you're right. There are a lot of big name horses that have been pointed towards this event as a first priority. And the obvious ones are Gaiath, who was always really going to miss the Arc, and Love, who was an 11th hour withdrawal from the Arc today because of the really bad ground in France. So they're two of the big name horses in Europe this season, and the chances are they could go head to head in the Breeders' Cup turf.
That would be a fantastic storyline. We have plenty of time to wait and get into all the particulars about those big names. Maybe the smartest way for us to approach this Breeders' Cup question is to just look at the aforementioned win in your in races happening at Longchamp this weekend. And I'm just going to run through them on the way they're listed on the Breeders' Cup site, Nick, and you can let me know if you have any thoughts about runners that USA fans should be paying particular attention to in terms of ones who might be making their way over here. And of course, if you have a thought about who's going to win, we'll take that too. But why don't we start with the Prix de l'Abbaye, a win in your in race for the turf sprint at the Breeders' Cup happening on Sunday at Longchamp. What are the key storylines to be paying attention to here?
Well, the first key storyline is that you couldn't find two more different races than the Prix de l'Abbaye and this year's Breeders' Cup turf sprint. The Prix de l'Abbaye is going to be run over a straightaway 5 furlongs on very soft ground, heavy ground you wouldn't race on anywhere in the United States because there simply wouldn't be enough depth of soil at any racetrack to be able to race on ground that bad. And then you're looking at the 5.5 furlong Breeders' Cup turf sprint at Keeneland. Even if it rains, it's not going to get as soft as it is ever going to get in Europe. So, and that's around a bend. So two completely different tests. However, there are a number of horses in this race who could yet point to the Breeders' Cup turf sprint. And it's not a race that's been patronized very well by Europeans since its inception back in 2008, 9?
Somewhere around that.
Yeah. So it's not a race that's been patronized very well by Europeans. It's never been won by a European horse. And the key horse here is Batash, who is the fastest horse in the world. Don't at me. He is the fastest horse in the world. Yeah, he's not. I'm not saying he's two-dimensional. He's not really. He's just very fast, and he can only really run 5 furlongs. But he shouldn't really be running through a ploughed field on Sunday. And I get the feeling that Charlie Hills, his trainer, doesn't really want to run him much in the Abbaye, in which he disappointed last year. Of course, he was sensational in the race at Chantilly a few years ago. So he'll have to have a conversation with Sheikh Hamdan. I think Charlie's always wanted to run the horse in America and run him in the Breeders' Cup. I think the owner's been less keen, perhaps mindful of what happened to Deja at Belmont Park back in 1990. But this isn't the dirt, and there's going to be no shadows to jump. So Batash needn't worry. I mean, he would end up being one of the sort of headline horses of the Breeders' Cup if he turned up at Keeneland. I'd love him to go just for the intrigue that it would create during the week. I'm not quite sure whether he'd get round the bend, or stay 5.5. But he's a very interesting runner if he does head there, and it'll be a more suitable test, as I say, than ploughing through the mud on Sunday. So at the moment, as things stand, as I'm speaking to you, he's going to run. And if he runs, he's going to be a very warm favourite. Would I want to take him on Sunday? Yes, because I don't see how any horse can be that short on ground that bad. If he misses out, I think there's other horses that could yet run in this race who could bowl up at the Breeders' Cup. I suppose the most obvious one is Keep Busy, who was second in the Flying 5. She's now in Coolmore affiliate ownership. She's trained by a man that I've had bits and pieces of horses with now for about 15 years, John Quinn, brilliant trainer in Malton. And she's going to be ridden by Ryan Moore on Sunday. She won't mind the ground, and I think she's got a great chance. And I know Connections are very keen to run her in the Breeders' Cup turf sprint, and she'd love it. She'd go round the bend absolutely no problem. She's not very big. She's very tough. She can run every other week. doesn't mind what ground she has. I think she's a perfect candidate for Keeneland. If she gets rated high enough and she gets in, but she's been second in a grade 1 already. I think she's interesting. I guess the other one, Make a Challenge. He would love the soft ground. He's a horse that Dennis Hogan brilliantly bought from Godolphin as an unraced horse and turned into a borderline grade Group 1 horse. He's a horse I think will run very well on Sunday. He might even start favourite if Batash doesn't run. And then there's last year's winner, Glass Slippers, who came out and won the Flying Five last time. She's mighty underappreciated for a filly that's won a brace of Group 1 races. So a good race. I think there's plenty of these that could yet bowl up at the Breeders' Cup. That's
great to hear. I wasn't necessarily expecting there to be potentially that much cross-pollination for all the reasons you outlined at the beginning. Let's move on to the Prix de l'Opera. We've got a win and you're in for the Maker's Mark filly and mare turf here. What do you think? Will there be some participants who might go on from this race and come to the States? And what do you think about this year's edition?
Well, look at the ownership of some of the key contenders here. Alpine Star. Jessie Harrington trains for the Niarchos family. She's already a Group 1 winner over a mile, and she's run 2 fine races in defeat, latterly to one of the best horses in the world in the shape of John Gosden's Palace Pier. So Alpine Star, I think she won't mind the ground. She's pretty adaptable. She's quite handy. She's a half-sister to the very good filly, the very good Master Craftsman filly Alpha Centauri that was such a star for these connections a couple of years ago. I can see her running another bold race here, and I would imagine she will be on the plane to Keeneland if all goes well. She's only had the 3 starts this season. Another one I think is interesting here is Fancy Blue. I'll say interesting. Of course she's interesting. She's amongst the market leaders. I think this is a very good filly, and I would imagine now the Coolmore partnership might be ruining the fact they didn't put her in the Arc, because I don't think she'll mind bad ground. She's got a high knee action, hits the ground quite hard. A mile was clearly inadequate for her at Leopardstown last time. She was given a very circumspect ride that day. Prior to that, she was a classic winner and a dual grade 1 winner. She's by Deep Impact. She's credentialed up to the hilt. She's only a 3-year-old filly. In the Arc, she'd have been getting all the allowances. Yep. She'd be a single figure price for that race now if she was in there with Love Out. And it feels like a missed opportunity. This is a great spot for her, however, and I think if she wins this, why wouldn't she turn up to the Breeders' Cup? Torquil's interesting for Jean-Claude Rouget. They thought she was a really good filly at the beginning of the year, but it's perhaps more significant that they run Rabia in the Arc as opposed to Torquil. They see Torquil more as a 10 furlong filly. I could see her being potentially a Breeders' Cup hope if Sheikh Hamdan fancies it. Tanawa represents Dermot Weld. What's the one thing Dermot Weld hasn't done yet?
Success in the Breeders' Cup?
Like the only thing he hasn't done? Yeah, he's won an American Classic. He's about the only European trainer ever to have done that.
Winning a Belmont.
He was the first European trainer to win a Melbourne Cup, and then he did it again before everyone else went to the Melbourne, when it was ridiculous to win a Melbourne Cup in 1993 or whenever it was, 95. He's won everything all around the world forever, a multiple champion trainer. So the only thing he hasn't done is win a Breeders' Cup. So Tanawa was a filly with a bit of speed. She'd be interesting too if they wanted to give it a crack. Yeah, again, I think there's plenty of horses in here that would be mildly interesting if they got the win and you're in ticket. But it's a hell of a race.
I can't wait to see it on Sunday. Let's talk about the main event of the day. I can imagine English, Irish, French racing fans snickering at the idea of the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe being a prep for anything, given what significance it has in and of itself. But historically, we have seen a lot of horses come from there and run very well and even win in the Breeders' Cup turf, of course. Now, obviously, we've talked about the ground, the main storyline, Love not participating here. Enable, of course, getting all the headlines. What an incredible mare she is, internationally famous. How do you think this is all going to play out on Sunday, Nick?
Well, let's first of all pick up that point about the Arc and the Breeders' Cup turf, because I think, I always thought it was bogus, but the last few years have proven it to be totally bogus, even though there's only one horse who's done the 2 races in the same season, and that, of course, is Enable. There have been plenty of horses who've run well in one and come on and won the other, or won one and come on and run well in the other, going all the way back, going all the way back to the Bill Sudskys and then Ouija board and whatever. So I don't have any problem with that. And you just got to take each horse as it comes on their merits on the day. And there's a longer gap this year anyway, so your bags are time to get over it. So yep. I don't think there's a bounce factor to consider. As far as this year's race is concerned, let's make no bones about it. the two most potent threats in terms of class to Enable are not running in the race, and they're Love and Gayeth. Now, you could say Gayeth wouldn't have had a prayer on that ground, and you could say that Love's chance would have been massively compromised. But in terms of raw ability, raw talent, they would have been her two biggest foes. I still think she's got quite a lot on her plate. You've got two horses who finished up close behind her last year, Sotsas and Japan, one of whom at least has probably had as good a preparation in Sotsas. You heard the Peter Brandt interview on the in the Money Media podcast the other day. This is a horse I think that's got a massive chance and won't mind bad ground. Aiden's fielding 4 still against her, which is going to make her life tough. Her own stable field Stradivarius against her, who's going to keep going, even though he probably doesn't want the ground as deep as this. So she's got plenty on her plate, but she's had a great prep, and Gosden's got everything right to give her the best swan song possible. And now all she's got to do is run her race and hope that Frankie gets his fractions right, which he always does around Longchamp. And she's got to have an excellent chance.
Any chance we'll see Enable? I mean, I would imagine if she wins, that's got to be it, right? I mean, you wouldn't see them pushing the envelope and trying to come over for a second Breeders' Cup turf. Any chance of that at all?
Well, a year ago, you'd have been asking me the question, any chance we'll see her as a 6-year-old? And I'd been like, well, you've got to say it's pretty unlikely. 2 years ago, any chance we see her as a 5-year-old? Well, pretty unlikely. 2 years ago after the Arc, do you think we'll see her at the Breeders' Cup? Well, she's had a tough season. She's had injury. They got her right for that. They probably want to put her away. So they've kept rolling the dice cleverly, really. And they've managed to keep her away from certain horses at certain times. But, in terms of the big races, they have rolled the dice. Now, I think I'd say she'll be done. In a way, I hope she is, really.
I know you don't have a ton of time, Nick, and I do have a couple more races I want to talk to you about. This happens sometimes. We get on, I start having these conversations I want to have anyway, and I keep people too long. But let's talk very quickly about the Prix Jean-Luc Legendre, the Win in Your In race for the juvenile turf, and also the Prix Marcel Boussac, the Win in Your In for the juvenile fillies turf. What are the big stories in here heading in? And have you heard any talk of any of these runners coming over for the Breeders' Cup?
I don't think that Jean-Luc Lagardère is a particularly deep running of the race. Aidan O'Brien will be trying to use this to get his ticket with either Wembley or St. Mark's Basilica. I don't know which of the two Ryan Moore rides at the moment. They're both reasonably well exposed 2-year-olds. Just having a look at their pedigrees. Wembley's a Galilei out of a Holy Roman Emperor mare. Has a little bit of form on very deep ground, but this is a big step up. Ran a fine race at the Curragh last time behind Thunder Moon, who's probably the best 2-year-old we've seen out this season. So you could argue that's possibly the strongest form, but I think Aidan will think he's got better staying 2-year-olds than this pair. And so if either of these wins, I could see him fancying his chances at bringing them over to the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf. They're the kind of horses he brings to that race, a little bit more exposed with high-class form. So they're both very interesting. They've probably got Nando Parado to beat. Clive Cox has had a fantastic season with his juveniles. Nando Parado beat Carter in the Coventry Stakes and then came out and ran, I thought, a very, very solid race behind Campanelli in the Prix Morny. And given the fact that this is a horse whose pedigree and run style suggests he wants a bit further, I'm fascinated to see how he'll get on in the Lagardère. I don't know. I mean, I suppose he might be a candidate for the juvenile turf. I've not really discussed it with Clive yet. And as for the Marcel Boussac, might be the slightly stronger of the 2-year-old races. I don't think the 2-year-old races in Paris this season are that good. Joseph has his nice filly Pretty Gorgeous running. She sets the form standard. She was beaten in the Moyglare last time by Donica's Shale, but that was still good form. If she just settles a little bit, Pretty Gorgeous, then she ought to take a lot of beating. But as a daughter of Lorman, she shouldn't mind the soft ground.
Great stuff, Nick. Appreciate your time here tonight and wish you Godspeed in your endeavors. Check him out, folks. All the great work he's doing all around the world. You can see him on NBC. You can see him in the UK and Ireland, and you can hear him on the In the Money Media Network with his Nick Luck Daily podcast. Nick, thank you so much for your time.
Great to be part of the family, Pete.
Good stuff. My hat has magically changed. My shirt has magically changed, but I am still the same. So happy to have that input from Nick about the Longchamp races on Sunday. I think a lot of people in the USA are going to be getting up early to bet those. We're basically at the end here. I do want to point out before we get out of here that these next few weeks, this is just like critical time to be trying to get your qualification to the Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge. You could do that on horseplayers.com. There's so many good opportunities and games. Just this weekend, we've got 5 BC berths on the line at horseplayers.com. Go to horseplayers.com, check it all out. You can also come back and check the leaderboard for today's race. I'm going to try to, contest. We got one race left here at Santa Anita. And MoMA, look at this. My guy, Ernest Hay, in both first and second spots right now. We got 9 spots on the line. Alex Cox, GT Nixon, Robert Morgan, Tyler Wisman in the Money family. Love to see that. Chris Dewey, Michael Elise, and James Politano currently in the money spots. But you can check back after this last race at Santa Anita. I'm going to get in trouble, folks, though, if I don't get out of here soon, because I have a dinner reservation. A parent is involved, my 7-year-old daughter. We can't disappoint her. So we're going to call it, and I'll send out a screenshot of the final leaderboard, and hopefully everybody's going to come back next week for Horse Players Happy Hour and play in this contest where you get an opportunity to continue your journey to the $10,000 Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge. Remember, again, horseplayers.com. That's the place to go to win in for short money for your $10,000 buy-in to the contest that many think is the best one of all. I'd like to thank Jonathan Kinchin. I'd like to thank Craig Milkowski. I'd like to thank Nick Luck. I'd like to thank producer Craig Gorbanoff, DJ Unstable himself, for all his help in bringing you this show today. Most of all, though, I'd like to thank all of you, the listeners and viewers who make these shows so much fun to do. This show has been a production of the Breeders' Cup and In the Money Media. Our business manager is Drew Coatney. Our chief creative officer is the aforementioned Jonathan Kinchin. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatow. May you win all your photos.